7 days have altered Tottenham, but it might yet be a change for the better here. Emma Hurd, Sky News, North London.
Well, the riots turned the eyes of the world on the UK this week. They weren't a great advert for Britain, especially with the Olympics around the corner. Let's talk about how the rest of the world viewed the scenes of violence and looting. I'm joined here in the studio by French commentator Daniel Pagion and the former Iranian diplomat and analyst Dr. Mirdad Konsari. Perhaps you can first both just briefly outline, Dr. Konsari first, what was said in the Iranian news. How did the newspapers report it?
Well, I think the Iranian authorities and primarily President Ahmadinejad addressed this issue with the same level of cheek, vulgarity and disdain that he has shown to the Iranian people by blaming Britain for having brutally suppressed people, for not having listened to the causes and plights of the people, for not allowing people to participate in the political process, for accusing people who have rioters of being hooligans and drug dealers. In essence, all the labels that his government has used against people he has suppressed and imprisoned in the course of the last 2 years, all these labels have been switched, and they have demanded, for example, that the UN Security Council should hear this issue, and one of the leaders of the Basij, which is this militia that is used to suppress the people, has offered even to send certain units, should the Security Council approve, to guard the streets of Britain and protect the suppressed people of Britain.
It's a state media, so the president is using it for his own political gains within Iran, and would that be fair?
Absolutely. I think that what the president is trying to do, obviously, the overwhelming majority of people are aware of realities and understand, you know, as I said, the vulgarity of Ahmadinejad in coming out with these statements. But this is aimed primarily at boosting his own constituency by saying that we are now in a position to attack others for the charges that they have levied against us. But I mean, it's a futile exercise, and it's a meaningless propaganda.
Daniel Pagion, the French culturally, socially have very similar problems that we do here in the UK. What was the response from the French media?
Well, it was almost as though it was happening in one of our towns. It's been covered extensively. They sent away straight away reporters to cover the events. First, there was a little bit of sensationalism. But then very quickly, when you started to read the newspapers as opposed to television and radio, in-depth analysis on the causes, and of course, depending on the newspapers and the political side, it would, you know, blame it all on one side or on the other. But overall, it's been covered extensively, and it has made headline news all week, and it's still being covered.
Daniel, has there been soul searching as I mentioned before, similar cultures, backgrounds in France as there is in the UK. Has there been soul searching about whether this sort of a situation could evolve in France?
Yes, but the situation is perceived as being a little bit different. In France, the social services are still there, even if the policing, you know, the local police have been disbanded in many places, so security there is not quite as safe as it should be. The other big difference, of course, is that in France, when there is a riot situation, we have the CRS, and that's very strong policing, which means that, in fact, it creates more violence. And if anything, I think the fact that the police was quiet, or maybe a bit slow, probably limited the violence in this country, which has always been the case, quite frankly.
Very interesting, the French perspective, the Iranian perspective. Let's get the American perspective and go to US commentator Jeffrey Robinson, who is in New York. Jeffrey, afternoon to you again. How did the American press, media deal with this?
This is pretty shocking for Americans. You know, we don't think of Britain this way. My friend Danielle mentioned the CRS, and that's what the French do, immediately send in the stormtroopers. And he's right, it creates more violence. So I'm coming down on the side of the British police. After all, you've got one of the unique things about Britain is this whole concept of community policing. And it works. when the politicians start fooling around with that, you're in for trouble. So, I mean, the police in Britain know what they're doing. They might have been slow off the bat, but community policing is the answer. And now, front page story in the New York Times this morning about Bill Bratton coming in to advise the Prime Minister. Bratton is a big supporter of community policing. So I don't think he'll come down on the Prime Minister's side. I think he's going to come down on the side of the police.
Gang culture, as you say, community policing is what Bill Bratton will be addressing. In terms of how the communities dealt with what happened to their hometowns, was that reflected, Jeffrey? I mean, did the news media there cover the cleanups?
Yeah, but you have to understand, we have a different gang culture here. You know, what happened in Britain has nothing to do with the Bloods and the Crisps fighting over real estate to sell cocaine on a street corner. That's not what this was. This was crowd madness. It's a whole different problem. And when you start sending in water cannons and stormtroopers, you're really escalating the thing far beyond the problem. One of the things that Bratton said in the interview with the New York Times this morning is that he really appreciates the British method of using just enough to get the problem done. Not overdoing it the way the CRS or they do in Tehran, but just enough to get the problem done. So I think you're going to find Bratton will come over and say, let the police handle this. They understand what the problem is.
Just one final point, Jeffrey. Social media, the big debate that has erupted, the use of social media by those rioting, looting and those cleaning up. I mean, what sort of debate has that sparked in America?
Well, listen, it just shows that the Prime Minister is completely out of touch. The problem is not the social media. Because if you ban BlackBerry messaging, they'll go to Google messaging. They'll go to something else. I mean, this is silly. This is a man who doesn't understand the problem. No, don't treat the symptom. Go to the root of the problem. And that's a community-based thing.
OK, Jeffrey, thanks. Final word from my guest here in the studio. Danielle first. The clean-up, I mentioned it to Jeffrey there, was the clean-up and the positive aspects that came out in the days following all the horrible rioting. Was that covered?
Well, that was not to start with. That was not to start with. Only the negative elements were portrayed. And then slowly the press started to pick up, interviewing local people and so on. I'm talking about the foreign press picking up on that as well. But it took another day or 2 days before that was started. They only saw the big thing, and then they started to try to find out what was going on. And so it has been covered, but not as well as the other aspects.
Same question to you, Dr. Consari. I mean, the positive aspects and the social media aspect, has that been covered?
Well, I don't think that there's been any mention of social media being made at all by anyone, because for the very pure, simple reason that they themselves have shut off all forms of social media and internet at times of crisis. And the speed of the internet has been reduced to such a low level that ordinary citizens have a great difficulty accessing, you know, just normal internet programs, let alone, you know, utilizing social networking. So they have been adamant in trying to stop social networking functioning within Iran, and as such they have kept silent about its usage elsewhere.
Very interesting discussion. Thank you for joining us for it, Dr. Consari, Daniel Pagion and Jeffrey Robinson there in America. Thank you. You're watching Sky News live now on our website, skynews.com. You can check out our timeline covering the riots. And also